Welcome back to another episode of Parenting Shrink Wrapped. And I cannot tell you how excited I am to talk about this subject because it is near and dear to my heart. It lives in my house, and it also lives in my coaching practice, in my classroom, and when I was a school counselor, it lives in my therapy practice. It is a frequently talked about, but perhaps less well understood topic than it should be. And that is ADHD. I'm here with Melissa, and we have got a good conversation in front of us for you.
For sure. It also lives in my home as well. So it's something I'm also very familiar with at home and then clinically as well. And ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Used to be termed ADD or Attention Deficit Disorder. That is just a change in terminology that's happened over the years. They are actually one and the same.
Isn't that weird? Like when I'm talking to clients and they're like, wait, they have a diagnosis of ADHD, but they're not hyperactive. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's ADHD inattentive type. It's just a strange nomenclature that has happened.
So when they changed the diagnostic criteria, ADD kind of fell out of the diagnostic terminology, which is related to billing diagnostic codes. So now it's all broken into inattentive type, hyperactive type, and a combined type if you have both.
But in all of them, it's ADHD inattentive, ADHD hyperactive. It's like just like redundant.
Yeah, and one of my biggest pet peeves, and we're going to get into this today, is actually how it's named. It implies that people can't focus at all, and they have all this attention deficit problems. And you'll hear as we continue to talk that that's really not what it is. And it drives me nuts because it makes people think it's something that it's not. So we really want to kind of combat some of these myths and give people a deeper understanding of what it truly is, and what it feels like for kids, their parents, who have ADHD or think they might have ADHD and they're not sure what they're actually presenting with.
Right. We're going to talk today a little bit about, as Melissa said, some of the less talked about symptoms and struggles that come along with ADHD. We're going to also talk about the superpowers of ADHD, because people with ADHD, they tend to be some of the coolest thinkers if you get to know them. We're going to talk about some of the pitfalls to watch for in your own parenting around raising a kid with ADHD. And then we're going to talk about what kids with ADHD wish their adults knew. You know, from our perspective as clinicians and practitioners who work with these children, and then we'll give you some tools and takeaways to close the episode. So this is near and dear to my heart, and this is a population, frankly, that I adore. I really like this population. I end up working with them a lot, and as a parent coach, I work with parents of ADHD kids all the time. Like, this is one of my favorite populations to work with because they show up totally exasperated. Sometimes their kid doesn't have a diagnosis. They just know that their kid is hard and driving them up a wall, and has been since a long time ago. And like working together, like sometimes I can help them have empathy for their kid, understand their child in context, and then give them tools that actually work. Because some of the gentle parenting strategies that are recommended for neurotypical kids do not work with children.
Not going to work here.
Particularly the hyperactive type of ADHD.
Well, and I think the other thing too that I've seen happen a lot in my office is when I start going through the symptoms and some of the less talked about symptoms, I see the parents sitting there nodding, and then at the end, they're like, I think you just described me too.
Oh, yeah, apples and trees, right? Apples and trees.
And then I'm going, well, how did you feel as a kid? And sometimes that also makes parenting hard if the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, because you may have a parent who either had ADHD as a kid or maybe wasn't diagnosed or is still struggling with symptoms of ADHD. And now they've got a kid, elementary school age or a teenager that's struggling in the same way, and there's just chaos being produced. So I think one of the common myths is that ADHD is just this like hyperactive, fidgety kid who's getting in trouble at school all the time, can't sit in their seat, they blurt things out. Um,
And it is that, but it's
it
not
is that,
only
but
that.
that's only a small, very small part of it, and it's not every kid with
Right.
ADHD.
Right.
Um, ADHD is much more, I think, should be thought about more in like a wide spectrum of symptoms rather than just like these one little things that are part of the diagnostic criteria but don't really explain it. Um,
So when I
so
think of when I'm describing ADHD or the focus part of it to families, and tell me if you say something different, but this is what I say. I say on a scale of 1 to 10, focus wise, ADHD kids are usually at a 1 or an 11, depending on how preferred the task is. If it's a non-preferred task, they're at a 1. It's really hard for them to zone in because there's no pleasure.
yeah.
If it's a preferred task, if it's pleasurable for them, they are hyper focused, which
Hmm.
is why parents will say, like, well, my kid, just try and get them off video games. Well, like throw what's more dopaminergic than that? What creates more dopamine or pleasure
Well,
chemicals in video games? That's an 11 for a lot of
yeah,
ADD
and
kids.
that's why I think it's mistermed, because it's not that they can't focus on anything. It's misdirect. I usually tell people it's misdirected attention often because
Mm-hmm.
of that hyper focus versus no focus. But I also think too there's a normalcy there that it's easier to focus even if you don't have ADHD. It's easier to focus on something you enjoy and like
Yeah.
than something you don't.
Yeah, for all of us, no
For
matter, right, right. But for
anyone.
ADD kids, the liking part is pretty critical.
Huge.
And so they need to, so I work with kids and their parents on trying to enhance the pleasure factor in whatever it is they're doing. And, sometimes parents will say to kids, well, we can't make them like everything, like life's hard. Sometimes you have to do things that you don't like, which is accurate. But there are other little hacks that you can do. Like, for example, here's an example. I was talking with a student actually just in this past month, and he was able to do his work at school, but then he would go home and he would crash and burn. Like, he couldn't work, and his mother, bless her, like, had kind of roped him down. Like, she'd taken his workstation from his room to the public area in the household along with his siblings, so they all had to work in the same spot. She had, like, there was no phone allowed, that had to go elsewhere. She'd gotten rid of distractions, and he had complied with all of this too. Like, there were fights, but he was like, she's right, like, I am not getting my work done. And he was an incredibly curious kid, so he was into a lot of things. But then he would get to work, and so then he would get to work and he couldn't produce anything. His self-esteem was suffering. He thought, like, and his parents thought this might be willful. Is he self-sabotaging? He says he wants to learn all these things, but then he gets down to it and he doesn't do it. Is he afraid of something? No, it turns out he had ADHD. The medication he was taking was working at school and it was wearing off by the end of the school day. So he had nothing
Wow.
left in terms of focus. And then he was creating a story for himself about why that was, and he didn't realize it was medication related. Well, guess what? I said to the parent, like, maybe a med reeval. Maybe take him to his prescriber and tell him about the symptom. They changed his med to a slower release. He's like, he told me recently, I sat down and wrote 2,000 words for a project, like he had a writing project he had to do. He said, I've never written that many words in one sitting ever in my life.
Well, that's the difference. And that's also kind of the amazing thing that you see when you hone in an ADHD medication correctly. Like, people will talk about how it's like a light bulb finally went off.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be careful with kids that are actually intelligent like that too, because they can mask symptoms. And this is one of
Yes.
those unspoken sides of ADHD too, is that especially when someone is highly intelligent, this intelligence and ADHD are not one and the same thing.
They
Lots
are two
of
separate tracks and they don't intersect.
Yeah,
I mean,
they don't
they
intersect, and it doesn't mean because you have this diagnosis that you have any sort of learning issues or you can't have an extremely high IQ. If anything, I think the folks that have the high IQs, they mask well up until a point, and then they finally get challenged enough, and then like their whole world falls apart, which I've seen happen more in girls than in boys. Girls seem to mask a little bit better, but this happens commonly that girls end up getting diagnosed later because in elementary school they're smart enough that they may be missing something and not focused, but academically still achieving really well because they're really smart.
they can also, those same kids, I think, tell me if you think this is off base, but they can look anxious also
Yeah.
because they're highly intelligent and they're like, okay, I was following along for A. I noticed something on the bulletin board and got lost for B. Came back for C, and I know that my understanding is like Swiss cheese,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I can understand it enough, and I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope that nobody asks me too much about B because it's something that I was missing at that time. And that feeling of like I know what it means. No, I know what it feels like to have mastered something, and I know I haven't mastered this, whatever this is. That can create anxiety, but they don't have words to say what I just said. They don't know their experience is anything different. All they know is like going to school or paying attention feels like holding water in your hands. Like
Yeah.
it just sort of slips through. And that's nerve-wracking for a kid who knows what it feels like to bite onto a concept.
Well, and Sam, you're hitting on like the emotional dysregulation that comes with ADHD because there's these mismatches in these kids' brains, and then they're quick to respond to things, and it's like they get really big emotional reactions or behaviors or whatever it may be in response to something small, and it's like, where did that come from? So because there's a strong emotional response, and then a little kid that doesn't have words to put onto that, or sometimes even teenagers still don't have the language to put onto that or recognize what's happening because it happens really fast in their brains. And so they seem like they're super moody. And it's like,
Mhm.
the little kid is like crying and throwing a fit, and you're like, what just happened?
Right. How did we go from 0 to 60 in no seconds flat? Like we were, everything was smooth sailing. So we've got emotional dysregulation. We've got, it's not just inability to focus. It's an inability to regulate focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's really high, really low. Um, uh, it's not just fidgetiness,
Yeah.
right? Um, and anxiety can come along with it. Other things, other topics, other things that are kind of less talked about
Less talked
parts of
about is some
ADHD.
of the memory concerns. Like people will come in and be like, you know, the kid just forgot what I just told them. Like I told them to go upstairs and they're in the living room. Like, and we term that working memory in the psych world. Um, but the information like literally doesn't get in to get absorbed and processed in the way it needs to. So they're active, like kids are actively trying to listen and follow a command, but they literally just can't. So this comes off as looking like they're being defiant a lot of times, and they're not listening. And then parents get upset and start scolding and reprimanding for not
Mhm.
listening, and it's their kid's brain just doesn't is not functioning in the way you need it to follow those commands.
So
Um,
also that working memory piece, that's not in the diagnosis,
no, it's not.
right? Like when you're diagnosing a kid with ADHD, like limited working memory is not one of the criteria, but it is one of the unspoken,
Yeah.
phenomena in part of this disorder, this condition. So when you think of it, like if you think of your mental, um, think of your working memory like a desktop. A kid with ADHD's desktop is like the size of an iPad. It's very, very, it's not a big, huge, 5 foot by 3 foot desk where you can get like put all of your subjects for the day, right? It's very small. So they can only take a few, like one suggestion at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So,
also, sleep, like one of the one of the questions on a lot of the screening tools is like, does this person seem driven by a motor?
Yeah.
Right? Like, is it like always on? And that would be more the hyperactive type, which by the way, I have one of those in my household, but like, and I just thought it was hard to be a parent, but turns out the driven by a motor thing was absolutely going on. And so it means going to sleep for these kids can be hard, and obviously for you as a parent, like a nightmare. I remember there's I, I said this to there was a parent in the waiting room of the practice where I work, and her daughter is hilarious. But her daughter is not, she's not trying to be hilarious. She's just like how she operates is funny. You know those kids who she might be humming or singing and like, or what she's wearing this like goofy shirt that has some funny logo on it, and like this is just how she is. I get a total kick out of this kid. She's not one of my patients. She was asking her mother a whole bunch of incessant and random and not relevant questions to whatever was going on. And then she's like, actually, hold on. Before my appointment, I have to go to the bathroom. So she left the waiting room and went down the hall to the bathroom. And her mother just looked so beleaguered. And I said, she is awesome. And her mother looked at me like, really, you think so? And I said, and I bet you are so glad when she goes to sleep at night. And she's like, that's exactly right. That's exactly.
Well, mine at my home definitely struggles to like wind down, and I think like I talk to people in the office about like they can't shut their brains down. Like they're still thinking, they're still creating, their minds are just going, and that doesn't set someone up to like go to sleep. It does the opposite.
When my son was little, he couldn't take naps. Like we had to lie with him, but really what we had to do was we had to get him to stop moving his limbs and his lips for 10 seconds and he'd go to sleep. So we would have to lie in bed and like give him kind of like a forceful hug and just get him to stop talking for ever so few seconds and he'd be out like a light. But it was comical, which is why I say like if I ever write a story or if I read a memoir about being his mom, the title's going to be The Joke's on Me. Because raising a kid with ADHD, because they don't know that they are spacing out or like leaving a trail of open drawers and empty bowls. They don't know that this is happening.
No,
They
they're
don't
kind
see
of
it.
blind to time in a way as well, Sam, that like
Oh, we didn't say that one. That's another one.
when you're on like a schedule, like in the mornings I'm like, we need to leave now, and inevitably the last child out the door is in my home is the one who struggles with ADHD, because I'm like, come on, we gotta go, it's time, and it's the same thing every morning. And even if he's up early, like it's just he doesn't realize like it's what's happening, that it's time to go, and he can tell time. He's old enough to tell time. He knows how to tell time. It's not that.
What I say is kids with ADHD don't know how long time feels in their body. So like, and I will do an exercise sometimes with families in my office where I'll say, let's sit for a minute. And when you think it's been about a minute, and everyone close their eyes and I'll keep mine open. When you think it's been about a minute, or maybe I'll do 30 seconds, raise your hand. And the parents inevitably are pretty accurate, roughly. The kid, even a teenager, will be like, I can't do this. That's the stupidest. Like, who even, what? That's not even possible for humans to do that. Like, they will abandon the effort before it even starts because they know they're outmatched by the task. Like, they don't know how long time feels. So these are kids where you're like, Melissa, dinner. And Melissa goes, okay, I'm coming. And then she's like, and then like 2 minutes go by, 5 minutes. Melissa, I said dinner. I said I was coming. And then you get the emotional dysregulation, right? And
Sam's mom voice just totally kicked in there. I love it.
and then right, and then by the time Melissa shows up for dinner, it's like 12 minutes later. Dinner's getting cold. Everyone's kind of ticked off, and the kid shows up and it's like, okay, I'm here for dinner, and they don't realize they're walking into a hornet's nest, and the parents are like, how could you not realize this? I called you 12 minutes ago. And the kid has no idea. And this happens every night.
And this leads into another unspoken thing is rejection sensitivity,
Oh,
because these kids then are getting reprimanded and they become really critical of themselves because they unfortunately end up having like repeated quote failures to do basic tasks like come in for dinner on time when you've been told. And then by the time they get in, the parents frustrated because they've been asking for the past 10 minutes or however many times that it's taken. So it's a lot more than this hyperactive kid who can't sit still at school.
yeah.
Um and not all of this stuff is, most of this actually isn't in the diagnostic criteria in our diagnostic manual.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about more things to like the unspoken symptoms, right? Time blindness, masking, sleep issues, the emotional dysregulation, rejection sensitivity, uh, sort of inability to regulate focus. It's not just
Yeah.
focus, lacking focus, and the co-occurrence with anxiety.
Yeah.
Right, so those are all like the less talked about symptoms, which is why it's easy to for some parents to not realize that what they're looking at might be ADHD. But here's some, let's talk superpowers, because people with ADHD, I like, bless them,
Sam
I
just
love
loves
them,
these kids.
I do, I love them. Don't give me a room full of only these kids, because like I'll go
Well,
home
that's
so defeated.
chaos, but
Yeah, but they are hilarious. Like, and I really mean this, like sometimes hilarious on purpose, because they're like quick-witted and they say exactly what they think when they think it, which a lot of us have a bigger filter than that. And so they'll come out and like their assessment of a situation is so spot on and nobody else had the guts to say it. And you're like, okay, you missed the social cue, but yes, you're right.
I will
The
never forget my child that has ADHD was at my in-laws' house, and there's candles in their fireplace area that are like battery operated, and my mother-in-law must have had turned them on, and he was like 3 at the time, and he said something along the lines of like, this is such nice ambiance, like randomly out of nowhere. And everybody starts cracking up. First off, we were like, where did he learn that word and used it appropriately? But it was like just random, and it's just like those little things, and it's like, but it draws you in because it's so cute, it's quick-witted, it's funny. um and then there's times where he's blurted things out where it was like, why didn't you keep your mouth shut?
Right, right. But so people with ADHD they tend to be creative, divergent thinkers, again, because their brain goes in all sorts of different directions. I remember this one student I had, this was years ago, like when I was first in the classroom. So I was in my 20s. And he was a transfer student from another school. And he hadn't had a whole lot of, like, he'd come from like some homeschooling and a Montessori situation where he'd been a lot of self-directed learning. So this was a more traditional classroom, and I was his English teacher, and I was asking him to write essays. This boy's ideas were the best in the class. They were so complex. Like, he would read a story and he would be able to see the symbolism and put things together from one text to another. But if I asked him to stitch that together into a coherent narrative that someone else could understand without him around to explain it, all bets are off. Forget it. Right? So like I had to do so much work on helping him organize his amazing thoughts, but he was not deficient of thought in any way. He was actually like outstanding.
Yeah.
It was out, and that's the thing. Like, who those are the kind of kids who, because this young man was having trouble learning to write in an organized fashion, he could have walked away from that classroom experience thinking he's not a good writer. And at the time, he was not an organized writer, but he had the foundational pieces. Like, he was the kind of kid who thought like a writer.
Yeah.
And we just needed to polish the rest of it. And I just hate for kids to.
Well, and sometimes part of the issue is that in a school setting, sometimes depending on the setting doesn't promote that individual attention for what that kid specifically needs.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Don't give me
And
a
it can get
classroom,
lost.
right? You might be the one adult with even just 5 or 6 kids wired that way, and like, whew, that's
Yeah.
there's not time to give everyone the attention that they
No,
need in
that's
a classroom
hard.
like that. Right.
And then I know we already touched on this, but like the hyper focus of ADHD is definitely a superpower.
Yes.
Um, Hands down. I mean, because when these kids like something,
Get out of their way.
oh
Right.
my goodness gracious, I've had so many kids in my office tell me stuff and facts about stuff that they're interested in or whatnot, and I'm like, holy moly, like it speaks volumes to their intelligence and what they can produce when it is something they're interested in. You
Right.
know,
So like when you're thinking about like someone a teenager who's maybe like exploring college and then beyond, like if they hit the career path that is in their wheelhouse, like just try and stop them.
yeah.
Just try and stop them. Like also make sure they have a good organized personal assistant. They need a secretary for their brain and their belongings.
But
Right?
I think most folks with ADHD also don't end up being very rigid because they have so many thoughts all the time that like they adapt, like they socialize well, like they can maneuver through things, and they don't get hung up on some of the small things because their brain went on and they forgot. So,
Or they're like, whatever, I'll land
yeah.
on my feet. It might not be fully complete, but like I'll make it through and it's not going to bother me too much. And so some like when I'm working with families where the kid has ADHD and neither parent does like or understands it, like sometimes it'll go the opposite. Like the parent will be incredibly well organized and the ADHD kid will be maddening to the parent because the kid like keeps procrastinating or keeps putting on whatever it is, like doing things in an incomplete way. Um, the parent will nag, 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 and the kid's like, I got it under control. It's not that big of a deal. Right?
Well, I mean, also too, at the teenage years, I start to recommend like to those types of parents, like step back. If the kid might stumble a little bit, but let your kid stumble. And it's the same thing even if they do have ADHD or not. Like there's learning to be had in some of that stumbling, no matter what.
I agree with you. But it can be so hard because as kids get older, the stakes get higher. So like stepping back can feel like, well,
Awful.
I'm stepping back and I'm letting my highly capable kid drop a ball that I know is going to be important down the road. Like
Yeah.
doors are going to close because of that.
Um, Other superpowers that you can think of, Sam.
Um, well, we've got hyper focus, the creativity. They're really adaptive. They're funny. Like they're funny. And also sometimes like particularly the kids who are oriented towards others, and not every kid with ADHD is, but like the kids who are sort of relational or other oriented, they often can be like really empathetic and they're just like good people to have on a team. They make others feel good. They see others' experiences. Sometimes they may miss certain parts, but like they can be really, yeah, really empathetic, really connected, or easy to connect with when they're
Yeah.
sitting down and focused.
Mine with ADHD is highly social.
Melissa, I have an idea. We've talked about the less talked about symptoms and the superpowers of ADHD, but then we've also got some pitfalls and like what ADHD kids wish their parents knew. What do you say to giving this a pause right now and coming back for the next episode?
That sounds like a good plan.
Okay, so we're going to pause right here and we're going to talk pitfalls to watch for as a parent next episode and what ADHD kids wish their parents knew in the following episode. So tune into that one. If you liked this one, tune into the next one and we will see you there. For now, thank you for always being thank you for being a fan of Parenting Shrink Wrapped. Thank you for raising the next generation of world changers. Thank you for raising your ADHD kids, who I just adore. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride called Parenthood here at Parenting Shrink Wrapped. We hope today's episode gave you some useful tools and maybe even a few laughs to help you navigate the twists and turns of raising teens and kids.
Remember, parenting is a journey, not a destination. And no matter where you are on the road, we're here to help you stay on course. Whether it's monumental meltdowns, teenage turmoil, or just the everyday chaos, you don't have to travel this path alone.
So until next time, keep your seatbelt fastened, your sense of humor intact, and your eyes on the road. We'll be back soon with more compassionate conversations and practical strategies to support you and your family.
Don't forget to subscribe to Parenting Shrink Wrapped wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you've enjoyed today's show, we'd love it if you'd leave us a review and share it with a friend.
If you have suggestions for topics you'd like to see us cover in the future, feel free to send us an email at parentingshrinkwrapped@gmail.com.
Until we meet again, take care and enjoy the ride.